the laptop, I'm sorry, whenever the site starts working. Okay, there we go. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some and peace out to the rest of you. The blackest heart, the blackest mind, the blackest man on social media, signing black in and shining again. Asking you all to hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. We are now live after getting a microphone that would work. And with me now is Mrs. Philosophie, who is chiming in all the way from the UK. And so she's been very nice to come on and explain something that she already did a video on. But I had to ask because, partially because I was dense, but also because of her limited time on the video that she was doing. And so I had to pester her and get her to come on to tell us a little bit more in depth, one particular question, and maybe even answer some of you all's questions. For those of you that know me and don't know her, she has covered colorism, including gender-based colorism, before, and she has her own channel, and she's also been a guest on others' live streams. Ms. Philosophia, did you start doing your live streams recently? I'm trying to remember when you started your first one.
Yes, just to say hello to everyone. Thank you for having me. I started the first week of August when I found out Anon and Light Skin Motivation were no longer doing their videos, or their channel had been deleted, or they'd left YouTube. Because as you say, in nature, there are no voids. Something has to fill its space. And I just felt it was my duty to just get in there and just try and deliver content, because the message can't be dimmed.
Yeah. Okay. And so that was you started right after discovering that they weren't on YouTube anymore then.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Did you have any hint that they were going to stop the channel?
Not at all. They had done a video and I saw it and I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and listen to that. And I went looking for it and I thought, why can't I find the video? So I just did a search and then it came up, other people saying that Light Skin Motivation and Anon had gone, and I listened to a couple of their videos and I felt that I had to say something myself.
Okay. And so nobody ever, neither one of them has told you that either YouTube closed it or that they closed it. They didn't say which one happened.
No, I don't speak to Anon and Light Skin Motivation outside of YouTube. Like, they have their own lives and whatnot, and I don't really impinge on people's lives in that way. Like, I would just speak on their comments. I'd send them on email to say, oh, that was a great show, or give a suggestion, and that was it. I don't think anyone, well, I don't know, I can't speak for others, but we weren't friends as such. We were more associates, comrades.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I found out the day that I recorded something about their channel going down. That was also when I found out. Like you, I just found out when I got on after several months of not looking to see if they had uploaded anything new about history, because that was where we had no conflict there. There was no controversy regarding the historical videos. And so I looked to see if they had any new uploads specifically regarding that. And then I found the same thing. I think that was the day that I found your channel too. I'm sorry, the day that I found the live stream from you, I should say. I found your content, not your channel, but specifically your content. And I knew they weren't the only ones that were covering the issue. They were probably the ones that I saw cover it the most often. And before that, I was aware of Light Skin Love. And she covered, now, do you remember her channel?
Yes. I used to speak to Light Skin Love behind the scenes, because when she started her channel and she was getting a lot of pushback, I was going to start my own channel then. But unfortunately, I was involved in a car accident and I wasn't in a position to start it. I'm still kind of recovering from it. So, and that sort of gave me the push to do it now, because I didn't at the time with light skin love, and she sort of fell by the wayside. Now that light skin motivation and Anon went, I thought, no, I have to contribute something to this.
Okay, well, in their absence, you stepped up, and so too has Caesar Cannon come forward. And even though I don't particularly miss Anon or LSM, not that I hated them, but I just didn't have, they didn't give the opportunity for me to miss them. But even still, I'm looking forward to hearing more of you and Mr. Cannon cover it, because the tone is quite different, and Mr. Cannon's coming from a position of let's heal up, and admitting that people across the spectrum are going to need this healing. I didn't really hear much mention from them, from Anon and LSM, about everybody in the community needing healing. But then again, I wasn't welcome to listen to too much anyway with the time that I did have. But there was the reason I brought you on was to explain directly the title of the question behind the title of one of your videos. And that was why it was that light-skinned men would not belong in the manosphere. And I'm speaking specifically of the black manosphere. And I'll loosely include what they call the Negro manosphere in it, which is a little bit different, but I really couldn't explain what it is. But I wanted to give you a chance to say why it is, in your view, that we shouldn't. Now, I am of the view that we should, and that really that we don't have a choice. I'm of the view that it doesn't. I'm of the view that it's not really much of an option for us, really, unless we're going to ignore what's going on between black men and black women as a whole across the spectrum. Now, for those gentlemen, sure, they have an option, they got a choice. But before saying more about it, I still want to give you a chance to explain, no matter how long it takes, why you're of the view that we don't really have a role in that to play.
I don't think light-skinned men per se have a role in the manosphere unless you're actually contributing to the dysfunction which the manosphere is in opposition to. So if you're one of the quote-unquote Pookie and Ray Rays going out here not being honorable, having low integrity, taking from your community, giving nothing back but liabilities in terms of children, damaged women, damaged infrastructure, a damaged environment. If you're not contributing to that, then the manosphere isn't for you. If you're not contributing to that, then you will be in a different plane, and you are going to be able to pick people who are not from that damaged environment. When I did the synopsis of Iceberg Slim and his life, Iceberg Slim turned out to be one of a successful pimp and a well-known pimp. But when you look at the beginnings of his life, pimps aren't born, pimps are made. And his mother would be the equivalent of the type of woman that a lot of the men in the manosphere are saying, well, she's actually both women. She started off the virgin. Iceberg Slim's father hunted her down, told her parents all these fanciful things, that he was going to look after her, he was going to take care of her, when he knew that wasn't the case. And he conned her into a marriage. She had a child with him that from the beginning he wasn't trying to take care of. He wasn't focused on his family. He was focused on living the high life, seeing other women, using his money on other women. But then because of that, and because she's now had to fend and look after Iceberg Slim as a baby, because Iceberg Slim's father, after he tried to kill him as a baby and he ran off, she's had to fend for herself. So now she's become the quote unquote bumquisha in terms of realizing that, or not realizing, but coming to the conclusion that she has to fend for herself. She has to become mercenary. Being a nice woman, trying to be a good wife gets her nowhere. And that's why she was unable to appreciate the life that the subsequent man that she met, Henry, was able to give her. She was unable to recognize that because, based on her experiences, that meant nothing. She could only rely on herself.
Okay, so in response to that, well, how would you respond to the counter to that, which would be that, generally speaking, the men in the manosphere of any shade, that the men in the manosphere are generally opposed to or in disagreement with the dysfunction in the community, although they're not necessarily willing to put boots on the ground to try to fix it, though they are opposed to it, and to the extent that they would at least say, well, we're not going to participate, nor are we going to pay any of the cost.
Well, the sad thing is, a lot of men do participate in it, because one of the concurrent themes that I see within the manosphere is that this whole pump and dump thing, as soon as a woman has a child, look, we can take advantage of her. You're contributing to a mess that's already there. You can find women who don't have children. You can find women who are not damaged. And I have to say, based on nature, that men are hunters. When you see vulnerable prey, you are going to try to take advantage of that as men. But what differentiates us as men and women, as opposed to our animalistic state, is the fact that we have choice. You could go and do something bad, but you choose not to. The choice is there. And if you contribute to dysfunction, you can't complain about the dysfunction. I find that a lot of the men in the manosphere um, have been brought up by black women. And as light skinned women, as light skinned men, we are a minority. I have to say, we are a minority in of itself, because we don't necessarily sit within the black community. We don't necessarily sit within the white community or any other community. We're almost like a micro community within ourselves. Because if you look, a lot of times we gravitate towards. When I had to look at my friends, I have quite a few female light skinned friends. I don't have any dark skinned female friends, because, or brown, because they always end up trying to do very strange things. And I never have a proper friendship with one. So I don't try. But from what I see of the manosphere, and I think sometimes, rather than taking what people say on face value, you have to interpret what people are saying. And based on what I've seen, what the men are saying is, they're saying, look, mother, grandma, sister, auntie, you're wrong. I need for you to admit you're wrong. You didn't bring me up properly. You didn't care for me the way that a mother should care for her child. Like when we looked at Iceberg Slim biography, his mother didn't shield him from, even when she had to change and become mercenary, she didn't shield him from that part of life. She didn't shield him and allow him to be the innocent boy that he was. He had to grow up and, in the end, protect her from her own choices. And I think the pushback when it comes to the manosphere is a lot of these young men who've grown up with either single mothers or heavily influenced. Their lives have been heavily influenced by women who have left their fathers arbitrarily for the right and wrong reason, and have made subsequent bad choices as a result. And what these men are turned around is saying is, Mum, you done wrong. I need you to admit you've done wrong, and I need you to tell me how you're going to fix up, how you're going to make this right, so I can in turn make it right and stop this dysfunction. And that seems to be the conversation. But then the conversation the women have back is, men, you abandoned us, you left us to raise this child on our own. I need you to tell me what you're going to do to put this right. And it's just this back and forth conversation, even though that's not what's being said. Under the surface, that's what's being said. Someone's waiting for someone to take ownership and responsibility. And I think that kind of draws a parallel to what Caesar was saying when he talks about his entanglements and the contracts he's found himself entangled in that he didn't realize he was signing up to. One of the things I said to Caesar is that one of the reasons why we have invisible contracts and adhesion contracts is when people fail to take responsibility and we say, right, okay, government, you have to take responsibility. I'm not taking responsibility for this. You're the government, you sort it out. It's only right, if they're going to sort it out, that they get the last say on everything over you, your children, your life, because they're taking ultimate responsibility. They've taken the obligation. And that's why the only way for me as a light skinned woman, as far as I can see, the only way for light skinned people to free themselves is to take responsibility. Look at what's happening within the black community and look at the, I would say, European community. They're starting to adopt the same principles that a lot of people in the manosphere are adopting. Like over here where I live, well, over here where I live in Kent, initially when I moved down here, um, it's very different from London. And I just thought, I don't know what I was expecting when I came out here, but the people, the native people that live out here are very different to London people in the sense that they are very simple, very, very simple in terms of what I'm used to in London. And they're very simple minded. And I really thought that, and this is why one of the reasons, sorry, why going off a bit off track, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to cover the IQ topic in my own thing, is because I think there's a big misconception about IQ, EQ, and what actually makes someone successful. But when Caesar was talking about how he found himself entangled in these contracts, and how I see how the majority of people actually live, we have to have invisible contracts and adhesion contracts because no one wants to take responsibility for anything. Nobody does, unfortunately. Or most people don't realize they're not taking responsibility.
Okay. In that case, then I could explain why it is that many of the men would say that we won't take responsibility. I have advocated against men taking responsibility unless, of course, they contributed to the problem. I freely admit that I am looking at the red pill awareness and the manosphere as specifically that platform by which to escape the responsibility for what other men did. Are you familiar with Obsidian or Mumia Obsidian Ali?
Not particularly, no.
Okay. Okay, well, Mumia Obsidian Ali has his channel's name is I think it's Obsidian Media Radio or Obsidian Radio. I forgot exactly the name of it, but he says that the kind of men that contribute to this are actually a different brand, or they're a different type altogether from the kind of men to whom the women complain afterwards. What he's saying in a nutshell is that you've got the roughly 13%, because the 13% that I talk about who succeed, 13% of men and 13% of approaches, comes from a study that he talked about on some dating sites or some dating apps. And they were the ones that gave him those numbers. And he's saying that the 13% that all the ladies want are the ones that they're the only ones who can do all of this. And then the other men are the ones to whom the ladies complain about the first one and then say, well, the community's bad because of what you all aren't doing. And the kids aren't coming up right because you all aren't here. But they're not necessarily holding the actual biological fathers accountable. And so that's why they're men saying, actually, if these other men are going to profit from the dysfunction, either we will leave the field altogether, or we're going to profit from the dysfunction we're going to benefit from the dysfunction ourselves, but we're not going to take responsibility for what we could not have possibly done because we weren't even picked to be behind these closed doors on these mattresses.
Yeah,
In that regard, I could say that's the reason why anyone, regardless of shade, is in that manosphere. It's not
I
just
can.
the selection, it's also the flip side of post selection. But I'll let you finish. Continue, please. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No, and I kind of get that, but in essence, for me, when you look, and that's why I had to break down the Iceberg Slim story, because on its face, Iceberg Slim's mother, she was just there to get married. Her family wanted to marry her off. Her family wanted to get sort of shot of her because she was just a drain on their resources. They weren't planning for her future. They didn't do the right thing by her and make sure that the man that was going to take her was going to be responsible and a decent man to her. Their main forethought was, we need to get this girl gone because she's a drain on us. And um, when you start things from an unnatural place, you can't expect things to go back to being natural. If you grow a plant if you grow a genetically modified plant, you can't expect it to behave like a plant that isn't genetically modified. You don't know what's going to happen as a result of the genetics you've put into this plant. And the same thing comes with dysfunction. Iceberg Slim's mother came from a very dysfunctional background, poverty. She lived in the country. Her parents didn't marry her with Iceberg Slim's father with her future in mind. It was about them and their resources. And that is not natural. It's a parent's responsibility to have a plan for their child, to look out for their child, and to protect their child until comes a time that child goes out on its own, or that child marries and goes with someone who's going to take up that obligation or assist them in meeting that obligation for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay then. So
and
the
and
men.
sorry, and I was going to say, and from that, now look at these women. They're picking these men, but if they're picking these men who are irresponsible, low education, um, they don't know. These are not the type of men you want to reproduce with. That tells me that more time that they don't have uh, either parents looking out for their best interest or a father looking out for their best interest. And as young women make decisions based on feelings, based on, and like men as well, when you're young, on third party perception. Oh, everyone think he looks great. Okay, that's the guy I should go after because everyone wants him. Same way guys say, oh, look, that's the girl every guy wants. I want her. It's not, when you're young, you don't make decisions. You don't say, right, okay, this person has integrity, this person has principles, this person is consistently good, this person consistently shows me they care. When you start off dysfunctional, the dysfunction does not stop. And if these women are picking these men, or haven't been taught how to pick men properly, they're going to go based on their feelings. But what a lot of women aren't taught is that feelings are fleeting. What you feel today isn't what you feel tomorrow. Principles, integrity, respect, those things carry on for a millennia. But feelings change, and I think a lot of, especially light skinned people who come from a background which is in the black side of town, you are taught to go on feelings, and you're taught not to judge people, like to look at someone and say, right, he doesn't earn enough, or he doesn't have the right things in place. We're taught to say, no, that's wrong. You shouldn't look at those things. You should judge him on who he is and how he turns up today. But that's not how the rest of the world picks men. That's not how the rest of the world behaves. Like I watch a lot of old movies, and you couldn't get near women. You couldn't get near women unless you spoke to family first. Even when I first started dating, um, I wasn't allowed to even go out on a date until the guy came to my parents' house and met my parents, and my parents spoke to his parents, and that's just to take me out to the cinema. Otherwise, um, the guy, even my husband, I think when I met him, he was allowed to come to my family's house and like spend time at my family's house, all in the living room, chatting and laughing, having dinner, and then at 8 o'clock he had to go. Like he wasn't allowed to come. I wasn't allowed to make a decision about him until I could see his consistency, until I could see who he was as a man. Because if you think about it, when you're young, um, if a guy isn't willing to meet your family, he never had anything good in mind for you in the first place. If he's not willing to meet your family and be seen, again, it means he doesn't have anything good in mind for you. And even if he does come to see your family and thinks, I'll wait this out a couple of weeks, having to see your family every day or having to see your family with nothing in the future that says to him he's going to be able to get you alone or get alone with you, that's a lot to go through. And someone who generally likes you is going to stick and show your family what they're made of, and you will get to see what they're made of as well. And if you look at a lot of the women who find themselves in these predicaments, having children, they're all young.
Okay. Now that leads me to a question, because I'm aware that we're coming from two different countries, and the total number of countries we could compare is at least three. And you may be able to compare the UK to another country yourself.
Okay.
And so that being said, I'm sorry. So it may, yeah, maybe even more. I forgot to ask you, are you able to compare the UK firsthand with the culture of another country? Before that was one of the first questions I wrote down, and I looked too far down the list.
Yeah, because my parents are from the Caribbean.
Okay, all right. I assume they're from an English speaking island, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And so now in the UK, that leads to another question, but the first one is in the UK, do black women with fathers choose differently than the daughters of single mothers choose?
Um, I just think I would say yes. The ones that I know, yes, definitely. There is a big difference. I remember myself going to school. Most of the children when I went to secondary school, which was predominantly black, I was a phenomenon having a dad at home, having a married parents at home. Most of the other children were from single parent households. And the reason I knew that was because they always got free school dinners. We weren't eligible for free school dinners because my dad earned too much, but everyone else was eligible for free school dinners because they were from a single parent household.
Okay, I see then. And okay, well, the next question I wanted to ask then is that in the country from which your parents are, is that culture of courtship still the same, or has it changed in the last generation?
Oh no, well, it's dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional. My mum is from Barbados, and it is just crazy out there. When I say it's crazy, my mom went back to live out there. She went back to live about 14 years ago. So when I go to see her, she keeps telling me about how the local people, even though they're married, the man will have an outside woman and the woman will have an outside man. It's just really dysfunctional. It's just dysfunctional. And the biggest dysfunction that I find when it comes to the black community is around sex. It's like sex is the biggest downfall of black people, and I just think that I think black people need to stop having it. I know it's easy to say, but I think that needs to happen because it's crazy. There's even this phenomenon in Jamaica where older guys, because dating women their own age, they can't court them. It's too expensive because in a lot of cases, a lot of these men are married. They will get with schoolgirls and they will promise to buy them an iPhone and they'll promise to buy them a phone and whatnot. And then these girls will be pregnant and then they will kill them. They will just kill them.
Oh,
Yeah, they will just kill them. Life is so worth so little in Jamaica. They will just rather than pay child support for 18 years or potentially go to prison because they've impregnated an underage child, they will just kill them. It got so bad. I used to follow this newspaper, this Jamaican newspaper online, and literally it was happening every week. I had to unsubscribe because I just thought it was too crazy to watch. But a lot of people make excuses for that and say, "Oh, these girls are fast. These girls want man and all of this kind of stuff." And again, if that is the case, that is not natural. So what's happened to that girl to make her like that? If that's what you're insisting she's like, it's you can't start off with something unnatural and then make it natural. The dysfunction will continue until you stop it. And that's why if you can't participate in any of that. And this is why I say to light skinned men, be careful what you're identifying with, because the dysfunction is so entrenched and so damaging. Because you're in it, you don't realize how bad it is. It's only when you're outside looking in, you can see that it's terrible. It's terrible.
so when you say, I think I understand something now. See, when you say the manosphere, you're thinking of mostly the men that say, well, let's pump and dump. Um,
Not
that's at
only
the forefront of your mind. I see, because
not
that
only
does
that.
exist. Yeah.
No, no, that does exist anyway. But not only that, but this whole like even MGTOW, men going their own way. Like as a man going into a mountain, sitting on your own, detached from the rest of the world, that's dysfunction. That does not help anything. That does not help you as an individual. That doesn't help your family. That doesn't help your group. That doesn't help your community. That's dysfunction. And then when you're old and you've got no progeny, you've got no family ties, you're now relying on my children to help you, provide you with services, because you've contributed nothing. You don't have your own children. You've not invested in your community. And this is why I say the Manosphere, MGTOW, it's Pyrrhic victories. In your mind, you will feel, yes, I'm not participating in this. I'm not doing any of this crap. Yes, I'm just going to be over here. But there's going to come a time, not only when you're old, but there's going to time when you need other people. We are not meant to be alone as people. We're not meant to be alone as individuals, as family, or as a group. We have to connect with others. And that's me saying that as an introvert. I'm an introvert. And not that I find it difficult, but even I recognize that I can't. I'm not an island. I have to go out there and mingle and network and make my life impactful upon others, as others' lives will be impactful on me. But the only thing is, I get a choice in whose life I choose to impact and whose life I allow to impact me. And that's all we can do. Trying to say, oh, I'm going to go my own way, I'm pumping and dumping, oh, F these women and all. It's just stupid. And it just adds to more and more dysfunction. It solves nothing. I would rather be in this world solving problems than contributing to them, either directly or indirectly. But in the same breath, I have to say that I do find it hypocritical when a lot of these men talk about these women and say, right, okay, oh, F them, F their kids. They're trash anyway, but then want to complain when these same children end up in the prison system, end up robbing them, end up Like, something has to happen to these children. And when I see people complaining, saying, oh, the prison industrial system, well, they found a use for them. You said that you're turning your back on these children. You're turning your back on these women, your community. You're turning your back on all of this. And that's fine. You can do that. But don't complain when someone else finds a use for them. You can't complain.
Well, I don't know if a lot of these men complain so much about inmates having jobs in the prison per se. Now, if they're exploited for cheap labor, I haven't really heard a unified stance. That tends to vary from person to person in the manosphere. Now, I won't front. I'm not with what they call MGTOW, largely because even though I heard that it was started by a black man a long time ago, a lot of the MGTOW men in today's time are white, and they do tend to go pretty far right politically speaking. So they tend to they want to say that a gynocentric legal system is disadvantageous to them, and they've been pushed out. But then they also want to say that black people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And so I look at them and I say, well, okay, that means that you're a rat bastard, inferior hypocrite, because you know goddamn well that your system started on non-white people long before men were really aware of any damage being done to them, because it was it was European men that had the systems of alimony, and this was designed for a time when they really did marry women that were far younger than themselves, and would have discarded them if they could have later on, and she wouldn't have been able to marry someone else. This was at a time when they didn't want this to happen to their daughters, and that was carried from the states and from the UK into the states. And so when the U.S. became independent of the UK, I'm aware that that law was kept as an inheritance, so to speak. But I do understand one thing about what the MGTOW say, and this is something that some in the comments section are talking about now. What about the legal system coupled with modern day feminism, where a woman can say in one breath, I'm strong and independent, don't need a man. And then she still has hypergamous instincts on top of that, which are going to conflict. She's not going to throw either one away. And then she can, especially if the man was the sole breadwinner, if he fulfilled that traditional role at greater expense for whatever the length of time is in that state or in that county there where you are, then she can take him and get half of his stuff, and probably she'll get child custody too. What about the actual legal system and the cultural system that together does push men out?
The system, well, I see, I find it a tad paradoxical. So let me just break it down section by section. In terms of feminism and women and traditional role and hypergamy, right? The point of feminism was to create a new contract. The new contract was, okay, you can live this traditional life where you don't have to work and men provide, and your husband provides, and you live as man and wife. You take care of the home, he takes care of business, and you can be that woman at home looking after the kids, looking after the home, and he's out there taking care of business. Feminism created the new contract where you can opt out of that if your husband wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. If your husband wasn't protecting, wasn't providing, wasn't doing the things that he was supposed to be doing, feminism gave you an opt out to say, well, as he's not being the man, I will opt for either myself to be the man or the state to be a man. And I will either go into the workplace, I will get in my masculine and go into the workplace and forge a career for me to either take care of myself or take care of myself and my children. Or I will still be the woman at home and the state will be my protector and my provider. That was the point of feminism. The early part of feminism really was to help unfortunate looking women, or women who I would, I don't want to really say lesbians, but women who were forced into marriages, into unions, which they didn't want, in order to access their wealth. That's how feminism originally started, because the wealth was never inherited by the woman, it was always inherited by the son. But the thing is, when you're a father and you plan right, fathers who plan right planned correctly for their daughters, and rather than allowing their daughters to inherit or their sons to inherit, they would create trusts, and that way the family wealth was never at stake or would never be susceptible to a husband or wife, because in a lot of cases that would happen. As soon as the daughter would marry the husband, he would have access to her wealth, and she would still be in a very subordinate position, and she would have to do what he said. An example of this, it's a really good film. It's called Far From a Maddening Crowd. It was a book done by Thomas Hardy, and he done a lot of books in the, I believe, the 17th, 18th century, which talked about how women were exploited. What is in England, how women were exploited, especially poor young women, how they were exploited and taken advantage of, and how marriage didn't really benefit the majority of women. It didn't benefit, and if you watch this film called Far From a Maddening Crowd, there's this lady, and she inherits this. She has a family title, but her family no longer have wealth, and so there's two gentlemen suitors that she had. One is a sheep farmer, and and even though she has no money, she considers herself too regal to be with him. She considers him a commoner, even though he has land, he has sheep, and he can take care of her. And he asks her to marry him, and she's kind of like, let me think about it, thinking, well, no. Then she met this major, and I think this is what happens to a lot of women. This major who's come back from the army, he's dressed in all his regalia, and for his first date, he didn't even take her on a date. He took her out into a wood, right? He took her into a wood, and he just whipped her emotions up into a frenzy. He got his sword out, and he was whipping his sword all around her, like cutting around her, like he was gonna get her, but not quite get her. So her emotions all whipped up. He tapped into her feminine vulnerability, and he got her emotions going. And after that, they both got married, even though this guy was totally unsuitable. He was womanizer. He didn't come from a good family background. He was poor. He was poor himself. He just had uniform as a token that he was someone of some kind of status. And sorry, prior to her marrying this guy, the rich side of her family died, and she inherited this farm, and she inherited wealth. And that's when she started looking for a husband. And the guy that was her suitor, the sheep farmer, he ended up working for her because his flock ran off of a cliff. There was some kind of storm, and he lost everything. And he went to work for her, and he saw that she had picked the wrong type of guy. And during the course, when they had the wedding celebration, when certain things happened, she was beginning to see, right, I made the wrong choice. But she made the wrong choice because there was no one looking out for her best interest. She made choices based on emotion and not logic and not fact. Because as we know, women can be quite illogical, whip us into a frenzy, and we're going to make a snap decision based on how we feel at that moment. And you're not always going to you're not going to get the best decisions from that. But that is a good film where you can see how it was for women back then, and also how this guy was able to manipulate her, how he was able to use his masculine energy to whip her into a frenzy and get what he wanted from her.
Okay. I'm going to tell you something about the states that makes a difference. And so, with that being said, I will admit my ignorance of the UK, because the total time I've spent there It's been about 6 hours, and it was all in the airport in transit.
Okay.
So I'll be the first to admit my ignorance of it outside of what people from the UK have told me, and a lot of my colleagues are also from the UK. But one of the things that happens in the States is that, and then I'm talking largely about African American women in the States, is that during my parents' time, the ones that came from two-parent households, generally speaking, did choose better. And I'm not saying they always made the best choices. Some of those marriages that wound up in divorce too, but they generally speaking did choose better. They at least chose functional men that were not the enemy's worst negative stereotypes of what black men should be. The ones that came from dysfunctional environments and single-parent households or dysfunctional marriages were the ones most likely to choose the worst, most dysfunctional, and most stereotypical black man that a white supremacist could have dreamt up. Now that's in my parents' age group. You had this difference. Right now, and really this has been going on since I've observed it since the 90s. That's not the case anymore. What's going on is that now in nicer areas in the States, and I mean even coming from nice neighborhoods, and there are some upper class, completely black neighborhoods in the States too. They're not that common, but they do exist. I have several friends that live in one of them in Atlanta. I met people that come from Prince George's County, Maryland, as an example. So some of these enclaves do exist. But to make a long story short, coming even from these areas where they would have been surrounded by positive black adult male role models, this was not wanted. They were choosing almost as though they expected to live the rest of their lives in dangerous neighborhoods, even though they didn't grow up in them, and they weren't making career decisions based on this. Now, to give an example, my mother didn't believe that this was happening when I first told her. And my mother has several friends in New Orleans because we grew up on the Gulf Coast and outside of Houston. I think New Orleans is the biggest city on the Gulf Coast. I'm sorry, outside of Houston and Tampa, I think New Orleans is the biggest one. So she had plenty of friends in New Orleans. And when I was maybe about, I was either 22 or 23, she went to eat lunch with a bunch of friends in New Orleans. And they asked her, a lot of them had daughters, and I've met their daughters at some point in my childhood. They asked her if my brother and I were attached. And she said no, and as a matter of fact, I don't even believe their excuses. They say that these girls are looking for pretty much only professional athletes, rappers, and thugs, and nothing else. And she said that they said to her, yeah, that's the problem. That's why we're asking about your sons. Are they attached? Because we're trying to get them away from these guys they want. Now, to better illustrate, my mom does not run in dysfunctional circles. She came up bougie. She's not from the South herself, but she came up bougie. Have you heard people use that term in American English before?
Yep, bougie, definitely.
Okay, all right. I know it's a French word, but we just changed it to bougie in the States. Well, that's how she came up, and so she came up as part of that black upper class, and she wasn't with anything that could hold somebody back. So she was describing this to her friends. Now these are her friends too. They're the same way. So they were pretty much complaining to my mother about this because the parents of sons, similar parents of similar sons in New Orleans, these daughters had already friend zoned. They weren't necessarily rude or things like that, but apparently they'd already friend zoned them. Or they would pick some of those guys as long as those guys were already womanizers. They were fine with that. That's okay. He's already a womanizer, even if he's using his money to do it, that's okay. But like you said, there has to be this validation from other women. And when we men had to outgrow this pretty much in college, we noticed that they weren't outgrowing it in college coming up with us. That's why it is that I recorded and said that light-skinned men also have to be in the manosphere. See, the thing was, at least stateside, there are a few ways that you could be sort of pushed to the side to where you really are not, you're not going to have a black wife and a black family, because you're not even going to have black girlfriends if that's the kind of life you live. And
Okay.
one of the ways that that can happen, now, pretty much just don't be a thug. Don't be the negative stereotype. That's one way in terms of behavior. But also, you don't want to be too pale and you don't want to be too racially ambiguous looking either, because that doesn't go with the stereotype. You see what I mean?
In the black community or outside of the black community?
Oh no, in the black community, because when white people are going through this, I'm aware they're going through it, but when they go through it, I celebrate. I'm glad for it, because I feel like their community deserves this, because we didn't get this dysfunction from ourselves. We perpetuated. We have to take blame for that, but we can't take blame for starting this stuff. That wasn't us. They started that, and they know it. So when they go through it, I'm happy. I'm like, great, good, excellent. But I don't want us going through it, because we didn't do anything to deserve it when we were back home. And I admit that's my militancy coming out, but my militancy is based on studying history. I used to teach it in the States before I left and came to the Gulf nations. But you see, the thing is that it's not. I'm not only saying that light-skinned men have a role in the manosphere and maybe don't even have a choice. It's just that it's understood here that if you are a black man and your appearance is unquestionable, you're recognizably black, but you don't behave negatively, stereotypically, you got a role in the manosphere, because yeah, you do get not just unchosen when you're young, but you get disrespected when you're young. It's not just being overlooked or passed up, you get disrespected for it. And so the other thing too was that if you just aren't visibly recognizable amongst us, and white folks aren't afraid of you when they first see you from a mile away, that's you get the same treatment. You're not necessarily just unchosen, but you're outright disrespected. And so you're actually expected to. Well, man, to start with, you are expected to play stepdad and be okay with it. You are expected to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go help her change her tire while she's coming from a dick appointment with somebody else. And I mean, you're expected to be perfectly okay with being awakened at 3 in the morning to go and change this, go out somewhere, change the tire, give her a lift, knowing doggone well that she's coming from a dick appointment with somebody else altogether. And
why would you be with someone who's like that?
Well, that's the thing. See, you're expected to not actually be with them. You're expected to be that buddy that has to do this because you're the brother. And you're expected to be okay with this time and time again. It's deeper than that too. I'm starting at the surface and going a little bit deeper each time. You're expected to be okay with this again and again and again. And not only that, but you know how you might say, well, look, okay, your friend is single. Why don't you put in a good word for me? You're expected to actually feel guilty for suggesting something like that, because you're thinking about yourself. You're just expected to be okay with that. Another example, you're expected to be okay with, let's say you know that somebody was loose. Maybe it was just a friend, but you know that one of your lady friends, I don't mean a girlfriend per se, but just someone you know, was loose, indiscreet. She was, you know about this. And then years later, when they come back and they say, you know, I should have been with you, but then it's like they come back to you, but then they're still trying to raise those extra standards. You actually expected to be okay with that. That's the thing about it. And that's what I mean when I say the disrespect. You're actually expected to be okay with being held to a higher standard than somebody else was. And it can be because of behaviors that just weren't negatively stereotypical. You don't have to necessarily behave like Urkel. Simply not behaving like Tretch from Naughty by Nature could do it when you're young. But at pretty much all ages, also a racially ambiguous look, or in some parts of the country, even just being a little bit paler while still recognizably one of us, it either consciously or subconsciously, usually it's both, you were actually expected to be okay with somebody else getting her best without meeting the same standards that you're meeting, and then her coming back to you later on, and you have to do more to get less. I.e., I've actually had a friend from college try to proposition me. While I know what she used to do with other guys, I knew about this, and that's just one example. I don't want to say too much because
I'm just trying to understand. So she propositioned you. What did she just that she wanted to go out with you, or she wanted to sleep with you? What kind of?
Oh, there wasn't time to go out because I was traveling through the city in which I went to college. I went to college and I was traveling through it, and so I was going to drop my daughters off with their mom because they were going to have to go back to the city in which they reside, and my vacation time was up, so that was the case. Now there was one that said I would have tried to take advantage of you, but I just couldn't find a babysitter. That's a different story. But I'm talking about someone that I knew was loose back in the day, and admitted to liking thugs, rough guys that have records. It admitted to this back in the day, and actually admitted to this because I was flirting. You see what I'm saying? And that's when she admitted to this back during college days. So then fast forward to me being almost as old as I am now, and having somebody say, yeah, well, look, let's just say proposition me. But then saying something like, I would marry you actually if you courted me. If I courted you, somebody else got the best and they already got the draws and didn't have to court you. You don't come to me and tell me I got to do more than somebody else, and you gave them more than what you. It's another thing too. You're actually expected to be okay with being stood up. I'm talking outright stood up, and you are expected to not really find that offensive or insulting. Now, if you get stood up and you give another chance, of course, you lose their respect. If you get stood up and then you say, what the hell, what's wrong with you, then you're considered arrogant. So that's what I'm saying, is that that's this over analysis, this over scrutiny, a hyper scrutiny that you got to go through. Anything you do is considered to be wrong, and you're expected to be okay with that. And so what these men are saying is, whether it's based on shade or whether it's just based on a lack of negative stereotypical behaviors, with these men, and I understand now why you were saying that they don't have a role in the manosphere, they don't have a place in it. What these men are saying is, you don't bring another man's kids for us to raise, especially if there's no way we could have been the father of those kids because we weren't your type sexually. You can't do that. What these men are also saying is, so if these kids are going buck wild, it's between you, the kid, and their biological dad. That's where the rights are. That's also where the responsibilities are. What they're also saying is, you don't come and tell us to fix the community when the community is partially in the shape that it's in because of the choices that you've made. Because the men that would have actually built, maintained, or tried to repair the community, you not even having kids with them, but you wouldn't have even been along with them to have the kids. They weren't your type. So you're actually rewarding, kids or not, you're out there rewarding the most stereotypical behaviors anyway. So you got these younger guys that are behaving the way they do because that's where the rewards are. But the other thing too is that the manosphere, and I realize that they probably didn't explain it to you. The manosphere does include men that will just pump. It does include men that will pump and dump. But generally speaking, men in the manosphere do not believe in making kids outside of wedlock. And so, like you, the men of the manosphere, whatever the shade is, and I'm talking black men of the manosphere, they're generally against having kids outside of wedlock.
So they're celibate?
No, I said they're against making kids outside of wedlock.
Yeah, but sex is for making children. We find recreation in it, but sex is there for making children. Like, this is what I don't know. I find it very bizarre that.
I'm sorry, you have to say that one more time. You find it what? The voice broke. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I said I find it very bizarre when men are surprised when they have sex, someone gets pregnant. Right. Whilst I recognise there's a plethora of contraception women can use and whatnot, that's out there, nature's going to find a way. Nature makes sex enjoyable, especially for men, because nature wants to reproduce. So you can have many contraceptions out there that women can use. And as a woman, you can't use all of them, but nature's going to find a way. And I think if that's what you believe, if you really believe that children shouldn't be born out of wedlock, I think it's a bit hypocritical to be engaging in sex if that's what your belief is, because you're contradicting yourself, really. And the thing is, as well, that I've found is a lot of the men who say, right, okay, I'm not going to be the clean up guy. When technically we are all the clean up guy. We're all part of a community. We're part of the larger community, our immediate communities. These children, the things that they do has an effect on everyone, positive and negative. It also benefits and detracts away from us. And to say that we are not going to be clean up men and women, and to say that you only get the best out of someone at some point, who determines when someone's at their best?
Well, generally speaking, the opposite gender determines it when you're talking about forming couples. And you have promoted, I think you joined Anon and
Sorry.
LSM in, I'm sorry.
Oh, who have formed part of these movements and say that they're not going to be clean up men. They themselves have children out there who form part of these single households.
Well,
And I find that hypocritical in itself.
to be
You
honest
can't
with you,
expect someone else to clean up after you.
okay, your voice cut in the very last part. But to be honest with you, I'm actually one of the
Oh,
few men
sorry,
I know.
sorry.
I'm listening. Did your mic stop? Okay. Okay, I don't hear anything, Miss Philosophy, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the mic for a second and then unmute it. I'm trying to give it a reset, inshallah, and get this back on track. Okay, I've muted it and then I unmuted it. Now I can hear what sounds like you plugging the microphone in and unplugging it. I can hear something similar to that. I mean, I can answer your point. I just don't want to seem like I'm browbeating you if your microphone doesn't work. Tell you what, Miss Philosophy, I don't hear anything now, but would you please write in the comment section just to let me know if, okay, hold on. All right, Miss Philosophy, I see you're on another device.
I don't know what's happening. Oh, it's just come off. Yeah.
Okay, I won't tell anybody. I'll keep it. Oh, dang it! Sorry, we're live. They already know. Oh man,
Sorry,
darn it.
everyone.
Sorry. Okay, I'll tell you what though. Go ahead and repeat the last thing you said. Because if I respond, I don't want to do it when your mic doesn't work to seem like I'm browbeating you.
Oh no, and I wouldn't feel that way. Anyway, I just said I just find it very bizarre. In many ways, how a lot of men assert that they're not gonna be a clean up man, and a lot of women say they're not gonna be the clean up woman. And but the thing is, we all are where we either are directly because we have family members who are single parents who we help out and we assist indirectly. Our children have friends. Like my daughter has a friend, and sometimes when I pick up my daughter, her friend comes and spends the evening with us until her mom gets home, because she doesn't have a dad there and her mom has to work. So I think these things affect us directly and indirectly. But what I look at is, am I helping this lady to um help her family, or am I helping her to go out raving? Am I helping her to go out and catching some strange man who's going to abuse her and her children? I don't mind contributing. I don't mind being a cleanup woman if it helps my immediate and larger community, because I'm part of that community. And I look at it this way: if me and my children need help, I'd like to think that my community would turn around and help me.
Well, in that regard, I'll say this: a lot of, especially a lot of black manosphere men. Truth be told, the severe isolation that you're referring to, I've heard more so coming from the white MGTOW crowd. So I'm not promoting them. I understand a lot of what they're getting at, especially when they refer to the legal and cultural system and how they combine. I get it. There's somebody that there may be two of them that I can get a lot of insight from, to be fair. But neither one of us is about to promote them per se as an option for black men of any shade. We're in agreement about that. And when I hear the calls for the severe isolation, it's usually coming from them. When I look to see, a lot of times what I found is that the further north, this is just something I noticed, the further north they live from the equator, the more they would talk about that. But the more tropical the area that they lived in was, the less they would talk about outright severe isolation, and more so just staying out of legal trouble, staying unmarried and childless, because generally speaking, they do believe in being childless too. But to be fair to other men in the black manosphere, what I found is that I'm one of the few that has a child out of wedlock. Now, granted, this was years ago. This was before I was Muslim, and I didn't know anything about red pill, or let alone a manosphere, let alone a black manosphere. I knew nothing at that particular time. But when I've looked at other men that even that have been in this, usually if they do have children, the children are grown, or they have the children in a marriage. And I think maybe, I don't remember who it was that had a child out of wedlock from before they knew this stuff either. But I'm just saying that to say that in general, men in the black manosphere, they're not really for, they're not for having babies out of wedlock at all anyway. And to be fair, it seems to me like you also came up in a situation that was not stereotypical for black folks. I don't mean typical, but it wasn't stereotypical. It seems like you came up similar to how I did.
I
But the
grew up in a
dysfunction,
poor white area. I didn't grow up in a black area. And I think one of the saving graces for my family, well, my parents, I think they looked at the dysfunction in their own families. And I would say the first 10 years of our lives, we hardly met either side of the family. We were quite isolated. So whatever dysfunction was in those families, well, I see it now as an adult, but then as a kid, we weren't exposed to it.
okay, and that's bound to have an effect on both of us. I heard about it growing up. I'd say from about maybe 13 and 14 is when I began to hear about these things. And they were usually either talk show topics, or they were things that I was told exist, but they were rare. Just watch out for them. Now, I wasn't really told how often these things were going to happen, nor was I told that I would actually be selected for this. I didn't hear that I was going to be a target for a lot of this stuff really till I was 16. And that's the first time I heard that I would actually be targeted for some of these things. And I still wasn't told enough, because I won't front. When I was coming up, my parents didn't know enough about how things had changed from when they were my age. And they've later on admitted they just didn't know how bad it had gotten. But we both have to understand that it does exist. And I suspect that your view is based on your knowledge of a better alternative. Much like my view before I knew about this was based on knowledge of a better alternative. I also have a very successful pair of parents in terms of not only their careers, but also in terms of their marriage. I I pretty much was looking for that same thing. And it wasn't until recently that I found it. It wasn't until about a year ago and some months that I found something similar. But we're looking at what we know can happen. And then I'm looking at what I know is becoming less and less and less available. But in all honesty, it's not the men that are saying we're taking these things off the table. What men are saying is we're going to take this very functional, commitment-oriented option off the table in our older years if it's not available to us when we're younger. That's really what a lot of them are saying. So I get why you would have said it in the beginning, but the black manosphere of which I was saying the light-skinned men even have a role in and may even not have a better alternative than at this point is different from what you may have been told. There are men that do believe in traveling, and I mean they travel just to dig out ladies. But a lot of them also travel to have companionship, sexual and non-sexual, with feminine women, with women that just behave like they're women. So whether they're paying to play, which I don't promote, or whether they're actually having a girlfriend there, which I don't promote as a Muslim, or they're going in and marrying them, which I'm fine with for the most part. Whatever the case is, what they're saying is we're going to get what we give. And if we stay in the West and we deal with the Western woman, white or black, we're just not going to get that. And so now to answer or to address the question that I had and that that I've been asking you, and that you titled your video in about why lighter skinned men would not have a place in the manosphere, because in certain parts of the country, in the U.S., and from what I heard, the UK is the same, and I learned from Select a Job, it's even like this in Trinidad. This phenotype is being told or being shown, or both, that we're not going to get the same treatment. We're not going to get equal treatment. We'll get stood up by the same woman that was on time for the last guy she dated every time. Or we're going to be actually told that we owe it to her to look after the kids, another man's kids. That we're basically generally insulting things that we know women would not tolerate from us. Sometimes we actually have to earn more money than another black man does to get the same treatment from the same woman, things like this. Or we have to be taller than another black man does. Or we got to have more muscles than another black man does. And in some neighborhoods, you got to have more tats than they do, things like that. That's an insult. That's a serious slap in the face. It's just like when a black man has money and he leaves you for a white woman. Then when he loses his money because she took it, he comes back to you. That's kind of insulting. And you would say, don't come to me with this mess. You don't offer me your worst. What we're saying is the same thing. Don't come to us. Don't sit up and say when we're young, we're the friend and we're the buddy. But then you sneaking out your house and sneaking past your parents or your mom to go hang out with this other guy that's not doing the same things, is not treating you right. Then you have his baby, and then later on, when you just worn the F out from being a single mom, then you come to us and you're like, how come I didn't look at you before? What we're saying is don't do that. So there are men in the manosphere that do travel just to dig these women out that they couldn't dig out before, or a similar type of beauty that they could not have found in the West. But there are also those that simply say, well, we're just not, we may marry, but we're not going to marry from the West. We're not doing that. And that would include Western European women from the EU countries, North Americans, aside from Mexicans, I mean, the white North Americans, or black Americans included, black Canadians. What they're pretty much saying is from these first world developed nations that have feminism, because hypergamy is still there no matter what. They're saying, okay, we're going to shun them because we're supposed to satisfy two mutually exclusive things, and we have to be Superman, and she gets to just stay Lois Lane. That's what's going on in the black manosphere, really. But if you were told that that most of them are out here just having recreational sex and creating children out of or conceiving children out of wedlock, if that's what you were told, I could see why you would say don't do that. I get it. I could see why you would tell anybody not to participate in it. Understandably so. As a Muslim, I'm going to concede that point. I would tell men, no, don't participate in that. I would say that. But it's just that what I came to understand now was that the manosphere, black manosphere, is different from what they told you that it was. It includes more options than what you saw or what you were told about before. And so, in light of the different alternatives that a black man has when he goes into the black manosphere, and SYSBM, by the way, just as one example, SYSBM is marriage oriented. IBMOR, do you know what the acronym stands for, by the way?
No, I've not heard of that one. A new one to remember.
Okay, no biggie. If they didn't tell you, I don't mind giving a brief overview of it, but SYSBM means Save Yourself Black Man. They're marriage oriented. And it was actually one man that doesn't put out any content, but a lot of people know about him in the black manosphere in general, even if they're not SYSBM. He and Mad Bus Driver, a man named Dwight Hayes and then Mad Bus Driver, both wrote down some tenets for it. And they said that they said that some of them can be tailored for your particular situation, but they actually do promote marriage. They do. They say you find the best wife for you, but you don't limit yourself to a particular culture or race. IBMOR means Introspective Black Men on Reform. Now, they're also pro-marriage, pro-family. What they say is, black man, get a black woman, but just get one from not in the West. Go to the continent, go to Latin America, somewhere outside of the West and outside of westernized areas. Now, they're considered a part of the black manosphere. They're actually they may be some of the biggest subspheres of the black manosphere. You have Passport Gang and Passport Brothers, and they do believe in just traveling, whether it's for sex or not. They just believe in black men, especially from the West, traveling and seeing what the world is like. And then they'll choose whichever subsphere they're going to go into from there. So these are the different options of the black manosphere. And I will say this about the whole pump and dump thing. As a Muslim, I'm not going to promote it. I'm not going to promote it because of religious reasons. But I'm not going to condemn those men publicly until women begin to condemn women publicly that engage in recreational sex and then conceive kids they said they weren't trying to conceive with the wrong men. When I hear that on the flip side, then I would publicly tell men, okay, stop engaging in this. And because the women at least are condemning each other for doing it, so let's quit engaging in it so that we're not hypocrites. But until I hear that, I can't do it, because in all honesty, what I'm seeing is that, I mean, you were saying that sex is not just recreational, it's also reproductive. It's true, it is. But we're seeing a lot of cases where a lot of these ladies are saying, I wasn't really trying to have this baby, maybe so, maybe not. But we're seeing cases where they say that. And they're saying they weren't trying to have these kids. And then you start asking them and they're like, well, I didn't take the pill and I forgot to tell them. Something convenient like that. And I mean, I know of cases in my personal life like that as well. I know of a case where, I won't say who, but I know of a case where I know this man personally, and his son's maternal grandmother told his own mother, I knew that my daughter was going to be pregnant when she left town that weekend, and I tried to stop her. I saw your grandson coming a long time ago. The paternal grandmother then told the son about this after the fact. Now, the paternal grandmother, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, but even hearing that just sounds so dysfunctional. Like, how can your mum say, right, I knew my daughter was going to get pregnant when she was going out of town. My daughter's 20 now, and my daughter can go anywhere, and I can bet 100% she's not going to go nowhere and get pregnant. It's just, again, it's dysfunction. And I find it very peculiar that if these women who are clearly very damaged and are making bad choices, why is a whole movement has sprung up because these women who are clearly damaged and dysfunctional haven't chose them. Is this movement about the fact that these women have given sex to these other men? Um, um, okay, they don't take responsibility, but it sounds like this all happens when these people are young. Are any other men are in a better position to take responsibility if that happened themselves? And I think in many ways, if this is what happens when these young girls make these choices, haven't they actually saved you? Haven't they actually saved you from poverty, from being a baby father, from being held hostage to someone who makes bad decisions and makes decisions based on emotion? Why is it that this movement always looks at things in relation to that the situation would have been a better situation had it been them, as opposed to it's a bad situation because it wasn't them? Why does the Black community always assume if there was some kind of intervention, things would be better? If there's
The assumption is
intervention,
really,
things can be worse. Like, even when I think about myself and my husband getting together, and I was young when I met him, I was 18 and got married at 21. Well, I was 21, he was older than me. And when I think back to how naive I was then, although many years later we split up, when I think to how naive I was back then, and to be quite honest, compared to my peers, I wasn't naive in the sense that I had a good head on my shoulders, and I looked at character, I looked at things in more depth than my peers. But in the same instance, when I think about people that my friends or my peers got with, it I could have been I could have had a really, really bad life. And and as much as me and my ex-husband didn't work out, I thank God I picked him, because I could have picked a lot worse. Well, not my parents there, but theoretically I could have picked a lot worse.
understandably, I've said the same thing about my American ex. I don't, I wish I hadn't married her, but I could have. As a matter of fact, the reason I did was because others were worse. That was why I didn't understand what my mother was telling me about her, because everybody else was so much worse. But see, that's the whole point. For what we see is that for ladies, there are good and bad choices and average choices. But what we see is that women do have choices, especially when they're young. Women have choices that men don't have when they're young. And then we see what the results are. And then we don't necessarily have the same choices, not the way that women do. But then as time goes on, we develop more choices, but then that's when we're older. But what about when we're young? You know, we were young however many years ago, when those choices would have been better appreciated, when those options would have been better appreciated that are not available now. But the other thing too was that, to answer your question about the movement, about the movement and men reacting to not being chosen, and wouldn't that be a good thing? That's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, yes, when the dysfunctional ones don't pick you and you don't get stuck with the child support payments and those years of misery, that is a good thing. However, that's not what their intention is. Their intention was to insult you, or either to just leave you by the wayside, which is not an insult, or to outright push you to the wayside in front of everybody else and make sure, or friend zone you, and then make sure they don't even put in a good word for you with anybody else. Because see, when you're a normal young man, it's not just the dysfunctional hybristophilic woman that's looking at you and disrespecting you. That's not it. Like I said, in the States, you can be coming from a nice neighborhood and it's Laura Winslow looking at you with disrespect, because in Laura Winslow's mind, you're already Urkel. It doesn't really matter if you are or not. And most guys aren't. He was a fictional archetype. But that's exactly what a lot of them began to see in just regular run-of-the-mill normal guys that don't fit negative stereotypes. And so in a nutshell, it's like the intention was still to insult you, then to add insult to insult. They want to come back later on and say, look, y'all ain't looking after these babies that we had by these other guys that we're not even talking to anymore, let alone telling them to, mentor these kids. And see, most black men in the manosphere aren't necessarily shutting themselves off, like I said, from society. What they're doing is they're still good to their family members. They're still participating in family events and things like that. But what we are doing is we're saying we're going to tell these young men what the game is. Because Jessica, you know who Jessica X is. She's from your country, right?
No, I don't know her.
Okay, all right. Then to describe her briefly, she's also from the UK. I think she's from the capital, from London itself. And she's oftentimes on live streams with a man named Game Changer. Now, she said,
okay,
that's her. She said a few days ago on a live stream that mothers are withholding information from their sons because they don't want to tell on themselves. And that's the exact same thing my mother told me back in 2019, I believe it was. She said the exact same thing to me regarding my son. She's saying to me, that side of the family is not going to tell him what he needs to know about the games that women play because they ain't going to tell him themselves like that. And it's just you'll have to tell him, son. I mean, I don't mind it, but as the parent, it's up to you. I'm not going to step on your role as a parent. That's why she wasn't going to do it. But she said to me, if it's not going to be me, because I'm not going to overstep your bounds, it's not going to be from mom and from his aunt and grandmom and all that. So you're going to have to tell him. That was what my own mother told me. And then a few days ago, I heard Jessica X say the same thing. Well, because of this information being withheld from these younger men, we're sitting up and we're saying, we're not cutting ourselves off from the families, but I'm actually the main one that's been telling these men, go to your younger cousin that's not even 18, and whatever the hell you think his mother does not want him to know about the games that ladies play, and whatever you think would offend her the most, you go ahead and you tell him, unless somebody else is already doing it for him or unless he's already aware. So we're not shutting ourselves off from society. What we're saying is that we are going to yank the rug out from under the single mom gynocracy that runs the black community and doesn't tell men what they need to know, and instead sexually rewards the men that just make a lucky guess as to what women really want and mistreat them and give that to them. That's really what a lot of us are saying. But yeah, it is true that you could dodge bullets at a young age. Yes, that's true. You could dodge bullets at a young age by being overlooked. But these guys that are being overlooked are not necessarily enjoying their freedom when they're getting older either. Some of them do because we're telling this stuff. We're saying the things we're saying. But then there are others that they never hear this, or they've already heard that we were just a bunch of bitter woman haters before we get to them. And then they're ripe for the picking when these women that were out here screwing the worst guys they could for free, then come back later on and they say, well, I'm looking to settle down, and if you're not serious, don't waste my time. And what we're pretty much saying is, I mean, even me as a Muslim, I'm sitting up saying, if you were screwing this other guy for nothing, you don't come to me and tell me what your standards are. And I don't believe in fornication, but you still can't come to me with that kind of insult. I would have more respect for you if you were trying to get me in the bed and trying to get me to fornicate, even if I don't believe in it. I would say, okay, at least you're consistent. You see what I'm saying? But you come to me and you come to these other men with these standards that you did. I don't mean you personally, but they're coming to us with these standards that they didn't have for the worst kinds of guys, most of whom aren't even on social media to begin with. And they're actually playing this dual mating strategy. I'm going to have his kid. He's all kinds of fun, but he ain't no kind of responsible. But I'm gonna have his baby because I think he's genetically superior. But because you actually, because you don't fit these negative stereotypes, you're gonna do the feeding. He's gonna do the breeding and you do the feeding. And that's what we men are saying, that it is too insulting to accept. You just don't come to us with that kind of deal. And there are a lot of men that were passed up and they got the worst of both. A lot of men were passed up when they were younger, and disrespectfully so. And then when they get older, they're sought after for their resources and their productivity. And so they're actually getting the worst of both deals. And they don't really know that they're getting it because they haven't had the experience to know what somebody else got. Now with the internet, with social media, we men are comparing notes, and we're seeing they got some guys that these women would never lay for. They never got stood up. That they were the ones sitting next to her when you called and she didn't answer the phone. And they're sitting up saying, this is how I've been treated. And then the other men that said, wait a minute, okay, so I was doing the same thing, I was doing all these things for this woman, and she was turning around doing the same, what I was doing for her. and trying to impress her. She was trying to impress this guy that already had a bunch of other women, and she knew it. And what we're saying is that's not going to continue, especially into adulthood. And so we're going to cut that mess off. And if we do gain resources and we get wealthy and we become successful, we're not sharing it with these kind of women that bring these insulting terms to us. And it doesn't mean we cut our family, but you know, a lot of them will say, well, I'm going to leave the money to whoever I choose. Whatever money I do make, I'm going to leave to whoever I choose. And so they may not be necessarily relying on your kids for their old age health care. They're more likely to be relying on, if not their own kids, at least some relatives for their old age health care.
See,
But
it's,
they're
it's
just
not
not
even
going to
just
feed the
that. It's
machine.
just in the wider community as well. Services. Someone's kid is going to be a bank teller. Someone's kid is going to be at the end of the phone. Doing what I'm saying is it's the next generation that looks after the previous generation, and at some point you have to invest in that, whether it's your own, whether it's an individual, your own family, whether it's kin based, your wider family, or whether that is your community. You say, right, okay, I'm a MGTOW, but you know what, I support my local Christians and I like the way they bring up children and I want to support that, so I'm going to invest in that. That's what I'm talking about, because we cannot escape being clean up men and women. As much as we intellectualize it, we cannot escape it. But I think in many ways the dysfunction of the black community, um, we are trying to intellectualize dysfunction and navigate that dysfunction. But the thing is, you can't navigate that dysfunction, and you can't say that these women are insulting you for saying, well, I had no standards before, but I'm going to have standards. You say, right, I applaud the fact that you've woken up and you now have standards, but you have to now have standards with someone who's on your level. So you need to find someone who has children like you, who's within the same social status as you. That's what you need to find. And I appreciate that you see and recognize that I'm now a catch. However, we are not in the same realm in terms of partnership. And thank you for your interest, but no, thank you. I don't think that's actually insulting. Actually, I think that's a bit of a touch that kind of reaffirms that you're on the right path in terms of your own life. But I think it's I think it's actually applaudable, that women who, I don't know, maybe start off very loose, or women who don't know how to value themselves, um, do find a value for themselves. Because if those women do have children, if they're going out there and they are still being loose, what are they exposing their children to? They're exposing their children to all sorts, and I wouldn't condone that. I'd never condone that from a woman, whether she thought of herself highly or not. I wouldn't condone that. And I don't think men should take that as an insult. If a man is doing well, a man's always going to get interest from women. And men should just use that as confirmation that you're doing well. That doesn't mean that you're obligated to be with someone because they're showing an interest in you. That just reaffirms that you're on the right track. And I think as light skinned people, we need to stop taking the same social cues that black people look at as negative, and we need to look at that and interpret it differently. Because I'm sorry, in the wider black community, in many ways, us as light skinned people, we are used as pawns. Like Jar Selector, he was saying in the chat, he was saying that most light skinned women choose light skin dark skinned men, the darkest men. But if you look at the community, we call it the black community, right? So it's the black community. So based on the label, the closest thing you can get to black is going to be the most acceptable. And if you're in a group where, as a woman, and this is why we have to interpret things different. Now, I know the flack that I get as a woman, a light skinned woman in the quote unquote black community, either directly of hostility from women or indirect hostility from women. I know the problems that I get. Now, if I know the problems that I get as a woman and I'm going to stay within that community, it makes more sense as a woman for my progeny who are going to be in this community that I pick someone who's going to help my children camouflage and fit more into this community than I fit in. Not only for one, that's going to stop my children being a target, but be targeted like I've seen myself as a target, how I've been targeted within that community. But two, it's going to help those children integrate more, meaning those children are going to pass on their genes. I'm going to live through those children passing on their genes. And three, as a man, I'm going to garner more group acceptance. Remember in the Iceberg Slim synopsis that I gave, one of the things that Iceberg Slim described was Henry. He was big, he was an older man, and he was dark skinned. At no
I
point
remember
in that,
Henry.
yes, in at no point within that story did he describe dark skinned women as not having any status. All the light skinned women were prostitutes, were whores. They were not on this pedestal that everyone keeps talking about. Light skinned women weren't revered. Light skinned women were at the bottom of society. So by Iceberg Slim's mother, she she used Henry to camouflage herself and her son and to garner acceptance from the wider black community because Iceberg Slip describes that all the social clubs she was able to join, how they sat at the front of the church on a Sunday, they were the best dressed and they sat at the front, which leads me to believe that because it was just Iceberg Slim and his mum, previous to being with Henry and um, previous to him providing that acceptance to the wider community for her and her son, that her and her son were on the margins of the community. They were on the edge. They could not sit at the front of the church. They could not sit at the front of the pews because they were on the margins. So when Charles Selector says to me, why is it light skinned women choose darker skinned men? Well, if you're going to attach a label of color to a person and the color of that person ascribes to that title, I'm not sure what else you expect. And this is one of the reasons why I reject the notion of black, because nobody is black. We are differing shades of brown. You cannot get differing shades of black. Either something is black or it is not black. From the time you put white in it, it's very dark grey. Add more white, it's lighter grey, and so on. Black is black, and nobody within the quote unquote black community is black. We're all differing shades of brown. And until people stop ascribing to this notion of black, you're always going to get this infighting. You're always going to get this notion that whatever is the closest thing to black is the purest form of whatever black people are, when that is not the case. That is not the case. It's a bait and switch on black people, quote unquote, and that has them on this Ferris wheel. The darker I am, the better I am, the more pure and African from the savannah I am. No, 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 no. Even the darkest person is has a purple tinge or a blue tinge. No one is black, but people keep trying to reinterpret this word to make it something positive when it's always been something negative. I've been trying to find out when this word was used to just describe black people, because when you look at the hierarchy within society, because I was trying to go back to the Royal Society to look at um, the status and where people lay within the status and the different titles, because even Sir, Madam, Mrs, they're titles that denote social status. And from what I can figure out, black is the status of a joker. That's from what I figure. And when you look at how black in what realms black people when you look at the realms in which black people are the most productive in terms of getting money. Sports, entertainment, it's all entertainment based. It's all making people forget their lives and enjoy themselves away from the dullness of their own lives. It's this joker status. But if we're brown people now, that's something different. When we're brown, there is no hierarchy within brown. You're brown or you're not brown, just like white. And I think this is where this whole colorism thing comes from, when they say, oh, the closest you are to white, the better. And that's why I gave you the gentleman Thomas Hardy, because when I read a book, when I did my A levels, there's this book called Tess of the D'Urbervilles. It's about this young girl from a poor family, good title, and her family send her off to um, frequent with her rich relatives, and her rich male relative takes advantage of her and impregnates her. And one of the descriptions of her in the book was in the summer, she had a ruddy complexion and she had curly hair. So within that period, which the book was written, if you had tanned skin and curly hair, that meant that you worked outside. That meant you were exposed to the sun. So that meant you were of lower status than someone who was in a house and of pale skin. And that's reflected also in the time of the makeup. When you look at pictures or recreations of, is it Queen Elizabeth I? The ginger-haired lady who never married. When you look at her, all her makeup was pale. It is to denote that I am of high social status. I do not leave the castle. I stay at home and I do not do any manual labor. That's all the whole color thing comes from. And even in Asia, it kind of refers to the same thing. The darker you are, you work out in the field, you're manual labor, you are not of a certain class. That's all that is. But I think the black community, they've internalized things like that and used it as a scapegoat to scapegoat on light-skinned people. And that's why I don't buy into blackness. Blackness helps no one, and it hasn't even helped dark-skinned black people, this notion of blackness. And that is why I reject it in its entirety. If everyone's brown, everyone's going to pull together, because as soon as you see a brown person, you're just like, hey, yeah, you brown, I'm brown, okay, what can we do? If we're talking about if we're black, I'm definitely nowhere near black in terms of my color. My children are nowhere near black. So what is black? And that is why I reject it, and that is why um, I I personally subscribe to Caesar's golden people, because I don't think you need to be of golden color. You can be golden mind, you can be golden in spirit, and that can still be ascribed to you. This black title that's been assigned is just it's just been assigned to keep people chasing their tails and divide.
Well, I'm in favor of what Caesar's trying to do with regard to healing. I'm not knocking him for using the term golden and golden sphere. It is a compliment to call someone gold. Now, the reason that you won't see me shedding the term black, and while you'll see me wear it proudly, is going to be about one. It's white folks that try to attribute negativity to the color. They weren't the only ones in the world that have done it, but they were the main ones, and then they built a system around it. But if somebody was born that was black, then somebody was born and they actually were black, at least as much as albinos are born as close to white as we get. I wouldn't want that person to go through it at the hands of people of African descent or European descent or any other kind of descent. Now, the other thing too was that I've seen these Arabs who come from African people themselves. They're just our grandkids, and I've seen them take on this stuff, and they'll use it as a compliment and say, "Oh, you have a white heart, mashallah." And every time they call someone white, even talking about their complexion, they say, "Oh, mashallah," which is like saying, "Look what God has ordered." And one day I just asked some of them, how come y'all never describe someone as black and then say, mashallah, what the hell's wrong with y'all? And this is one conversation in which they didn't have an answer. One of them actually said, you know what, you're right, that's discriminatory, but that's how we think. And so I took on this name when I first started this channel. It was Black Heart. I took it on specifically to offend their little white sensibilities, and they're not even actually white, but they call themselves white. And see, nobody says anything to them about it except for those of us of African descent. And even then, usually not from the continent, but those of us from the Americas who see some of them and hear them call themselves white. We're the ones that get on them and say, what are you doing? You're not. And then on the flip side, there's white folks that are telling them, oh no, not only are you not white, but you're a saying nigger. The epithet they use for us, they just add a prefix on and call them that. The two terms that are oftentimes used for Arabs are saying nigger and doon coon. Because coon did not always mean a black traitor to other black people. It used to just mean raccoon, and it was used as an insult for black people in general by white supremacists in the South. And so when they saw Arabs, they started calling them doon coons from the sand dunes. And so what I'm saying is that even the people that most closely related to us genetically, probably, even they took on this whole white worldview. So it has to be offended. They need to be offended to a certain extent if you're going to live with them, because if you live around them and you don't fight back with them when they say these things, even though they say it with no hatred, they just keep on saying it. And then one day you get on them about it and then they say, but you let us say it all this time. Why didn't you say something first? So I went ahead and just said something first. But to get back to an earlier point that you made, actually, yes, we men can be insulted when a woman comes to one of us expecting more than she's ever asked for from other men while offering less. Unless there's evidence that we either were her type from the beginning, or if we've done all the same stuff that she's done in her past, if we're coming with a similar past. Now, in that case, yeah, sure. But the pattern that exists right now is that they're coming to the same guys that they said or showed weren't their type, demanding and expecting more, not just wanting more. We all want an unfair advantage, but they're demanding and expecting more from the same ones that they said or showed weren't their type. And then they're offering a worse situation in exchange. And so, yeah, we can be insulted. I reserve the right for us men to be insulted by that. And I want to say to one of the gentlemen in the chat, infantry, I understand you're saying this is not about bitterness, and you're right. The manosphere is not about bitterness. I'm simply saying that I'm bitter on your behalf, because even when I was told at a younger age, look, you need to step off to the side and you stay over there, I didn't know what it was about. But when I did find out, I was okay with it because I thought it was just based on, black self-defense and sisters weren't trying to breathe themselves out, even just on a visual level. That's what I thought at first, because I knew sisters weren't into white guys. So I got it at that time. When I first heard what it was, I was like, okay, well, that's fine then. Because I don't want black folks to disappear, and I don't want us to change form and vanish and that sort of thing. I don't want to see a single phenotype that black folks have just vanish, just up and go. But what I found out later, infantry, was that wasn't it. And that's why I was saying that. Why I'm saying, no, I'm coming with the bitterness. I know you're not. And Butler Dola's not, and all the other gentlemen in the channel are not. I myself am coming with the bitterness on your behalf, because they were lying to most of us. And it's like this mass deception, and they participated in it, and they didn't even have the internet or social, let alone social media at the time that they started this mass deception. It's like we that's why we call the West the Matrix, because that's where this deception happened. And the internet wasn't needed. It's like they were just all on code. And the silent ones that weren't part of the deception still didn't pull the rug out or pull the wool off and expose it. So I'm bitter on your behalf, infantry. You see what I'm saying? It's not a reflection on you. You didn't tell me to be bitter for you. I'm just saying I voluntarily am, because you all got lied to and there was no reason for it. I could understand if a sister's actually pro-black and she doesn't want to be seen out in public with me, then I would get it, as long as she's actually pro-black. But if that's not what's going on, then yeah, I'm gonna be bitter for you too, because it's like saying, okay, so they just pretty much lied about everything they wanted to begin with. just to get you to do exactly what C Bookie's telling us to do now, which is, you pay the cost for her to be the boss, and you get less from her, but you actually give her more so that she actually has something left over with which to spoil some other guy. And that's in a sense what he's telling us to do. Just accept the deception and just deal with the fact that they're wearing a mask, and don't try to look underneath it. And you're right. It was about productive black men not being blamed after black women pick bad fathers. That is the crux of it. It's not just the choosing, but it's the choosing for all the wrong things and to bear all the burdens and for none of the benefits, and including fatherhood. You pay the cost of fatherhood, but the other guy gets to conceive the babies and then move on to the next one. And you're right, infantry. That's the crux of it all. But yes, I am bitter on your behalf, because a lot of you all are still stuck in the matrix.
I agree with you on that in terms of men who don't contribute to the dysfunction being blamed, but in many ways, the black community doesn't police these men. The black community doesn't police these men and say, right, these men are crap, get out. We don't want you here. These men are allowed to still be part of the community. There is no pushback from the community in terms of the standard of men, that should be desired in the black community. And that's why you just kind of all look the same, because there is no pushback. There was this great film that I watched called The Houseman, and it was about when Europeans first came to America and occupied. Uh, is it the Western Plain, where there was a lot of native Indians? Well, anyway, this film, Tommy Lee, is it Tommy Lee, the actor? Yeah, Tommy Lee. He was one of these Pookie. He was the equivalent of Pookie and Ray Ray. He was the equivalent of Pookie and Ray Ray there. He came into the area. He was claim jumping. It was a very harsh environment. So he came in. There was someone's house, and he just claimed their home and went in there. But all the men in the community, they said, "What are you doing in so and so's house? Why are you here?" And he was trying to say, "I've made a claim here. This is mine now. This is with a lawyer." And they knew it was a bunch of rubbish. And they said, "Right, we don't know what's happening with that, but you're in our friend's home. You cannot be here. You need to come out." And they bombed the house to get him out. And then they were trying to hang him, because they were just like, this is a community of families. This is a community of men and women in a stable community. Here's this male come in the community. He's invested nothing in this community. He's not brought any children here. He doesn't have a wife. He's invested in nothing. He's invested in nothing in terms of himself. Um, he's invested nothing in terms of a family, and he has invested in his community. And he's coming to extract from the community. And they chased him out. And it's quite an interesting film, because it kind of looks at the dynamics of the relationships between men and women, because you have the protagonist lady, who is the ideal of what men say that they want now. She's independent. She had her own farm. She had her own produce, and her produce animals. And she was trying to set herself up with other men. I remember she was going after this particular gentleman, but he did seem younger than her. And she cooked for him. She entertained him by playing on the piano, and it's quite a funny scene. And she was trying to be logical, and she said, "Right, I think we should get together, because you have a farm, I have a farm. We could bring the farms together, and we could produce something big, and we can make, it's almost like we could be a power couple here." And he turned around and said, "No, I want a feminine woman. I'm going into the town, and I'm going to find myself a woman." And she was just like, "Well, why don't you want me?" And he's just like, basically he was saying, "You're too masculine. You're too forward. You know what you want. And what you're saying makes sense. I want a feminine woman who's in her feelings, in her emotions, and I want to feel like I have convinced her to be with me. And so the Tommy Lee Jones guy, he's there. So I'm going to wrap this up quickly. I can go on a bit, but basically the story then goes on to these ladies who are in different states of mental illness. You could say it's an analogy for the black community. One of the women, she's gone mad when her mother died. She goes mad. One, because it's a very harsh environment. Her sixth child died, and it sent her crazy. And another one, because her family was starving. She had three children, I believe, three or four children already, and because her husband wasn't um, able to produce from the land and provide, um, even though they had a child, they couldn't afford to feed it, so she threw the child down the toilet because she knew that they couldn't physically, there was no food there to even sustain a child. And it drove her crazy. And the community wanted to take these women into town so that their mental health could be looked after. And none of their husbands were willing to do it, despite the fact that these women had followed them to a very harsh environment, had done the female thing, followed their husband, gone to this harsh environment to try and be the good wife, and follow her husband, and do the family thing. But the thing was, so that had happened, and none of the men were willing to take these women to get to the mental place to get their mental health sorted. So the protagonist, she said in her masculine, I'll volunteer, I'll take them. And they said, oh, it's going to be dangerous. There's Indians, there's all sorts of rogue men out there. And she said, well, there's no other choice. And she didn't have anything else to live for. She hadn't invested in her community. She hadn't had children. She hadn't invested in herself and as an individual, in family. So she was investing in her group by saying, I'm going to take these ladies, I'm going to get their mental health sorted out because they're part of my community. And as I don't have children, because she pointed that out, she said, right, no, you have children here, you have things here to sort out. I'm the only one here without anything, so I'll take them. And so she finds Tommy Lee, and she convinces him by saving his life that he should help the women, help her take the women into town, because she knew that it was kind of a suicide mission on her own as women. And so Tommy Lee starts to help them, and it's almost like a road to redemption because it redeems him as a man, because he has to invest in these women, he has to look after them. At one point, he's feeding them, and then when the protagonist actually commits suicide because she realizes that as a woman she has no place in this world, as a female to be looked after, to be desired as a woman, she commits suicide. And that's when Tommy Lee Jones has to really look after these women and look out for their welfare and invest in these women and to make sure they're looked after and they reach their destination. And it's a film of redemption for women, and it's a film of redemption for the men. The protagonist redeemed herself in suicide, and by saying, right, I realize that I've charted this unnatural course, and nothing natural will become of it. But Tommy Lee was able to redeem himself by investing in these women and looking after these women and taking them to his destination. And by the end of it, he's even looking to propose marriage to a girl there. He in this sort of bar saloon, he meets a young girl. She doesn't have shoes. He was just like, oh, this girl has no shoes. He goes to the shop and he buys her shoes. And she was looking at him like, oh, what do you want? And he was just like, look, you need shoes. There's some shoes. Just take the shoes. And then he's kind of implying, well, maybe you're the type of woman I'd like to marry. And she was kind of like, why is this guy talking to me like this? But his whole mindset had changed because he'd gone from thinking about himself being an R life history strategist, thinking about today, not thinking about tomorrow, to being a K life history strategist where he wants to invest in his community, he wants to invest in himself via his community as well. and he's planning for the future. He's forward planning. And I think in many of the cases in the black community where a lot of these where the, in a lot of these cases women aren't choosing them, these women are life history strategists, i.e., they're not looking for long term. They're not thinking about the future. They're not thinking about the consequences of their actions. And unfortunately, a lot of these women have children. A lot of these women have trauma as to why they're not thinking like that off the bat. But if they're not thinking like that off the bat, if you are a K life history strategist, that is just going to mess up your life. If someone who thinks about today and is not worried about tomorrow, is not future planning, doesn't care about the future, isn't planning for the future, if you get with someone that is the opposite, you're going to ruin their lives. And that's why I say, in many ways, if that's how a lot of women are making their decisions, a lot of men should be thanking their lucky stars that these women don't choose them.
Well, a lot of men do. I do see this a lot. A lot of men do say we dodged a bullet, but we're the ones that know that we dodged the bullet.
Oh, sorry, just to say, Black Minds, Leo Lion. What happened to Tommy Lee in the end? Tommy Lee in the end, he's going back. He goes back to the range because he's going now to find a wife. He's decided now he wants to be part of society. He wants to be part of the community, whereas he was just a rogue male going from place to place, not putting down any roots. That's what becomes of his character. He just goes off in. He goes on this boat thing into the sea, to the sea of commerce, um, to go and now be part of society, to be part of commerce, to engage in society. That's what Tommy Lee does once he's gone through his redemption. It's a very, very interesting film. Once you get past the initial shock of women killing their children, it's actually a very good film to watch, and it shows you the it shows you this battle between people who are thinking short term and people who think long term, and this value that women have, um, this sexual marketplace value that men place on women in terms of how many men she's been with, her children, that type of thing. It's very, very interesting, and I think it will open up a lot of people's eyes into what how the roles are and how dysfunctional they've become now, even though there was still dysfunction then. But it's a different kind of dysfunction, and it even shows a contrast between the plain and the harshness of the plain where these people live, to the lushness and the bounty of the town where they take these women to recuperate their mental health. And when you look at the black community is barren. There's not a lot of resources, and I think that's why there is a lot of mental health, because if you have black men who've been brought up to think, right, okay, if you do this, this, and this, I'm bound to get the woman of my dreams, and that doesn't happen. That's going to affect you in many ways. And again, for women, okay, if I do this, this, and this, I'm meant to get this type of man, and you don't. That is going to affect you mentally, because in your mind you're thinking, I've done I've done the steps that I've been taught to do, and it's still not got me where I need to be. And I think that's why there's a lot of mental health in the black community. That and the trauma that a lot of people in the black community experience. But this is why I say to the light skinned people, unless you're contributing to that black dysfunction, one, don't contribute to it anymore, and get the hell out, because it's not going to help you. And even with this word black, you are not going to be accepted as the principal black, because the word black in itself excludes you. And and sorry, just to add, and this is why, um, again, I reject the notion of black, because just by being black, you uphold white. You are in opposition to white. Now we know white people are not white; they are pink, varying shades of pink. But if you say pink people and you say brown people, they're not in opposition to each other. When you say white people and black people, they are in opposition, and they imply two very different things. I've like I've said to you, Black Mind, that the similes that come up when you type in the word black, not only in the English dictionary but the legal dictionary, when you type white, the similes that come up with that, pure, innocent, nice, kind. Type in black, dirty, without hope, soot. It's just crap, and I just think if words have meaning, as we're led to believe, why embrace a word that denotes you're something one that no black person is, because no one is black. Even the blackest person is not black. They're just a very, very dark shade of brown with a purple or blue tinge, but they are not black. But black people
Well, I
hold
don't
on
mind
to
calling us
this.
blurple. I'm fine with that
Yeah,
too.
blurple, that's even better, because blurple is in opposition to white, and it's very hard to call yourself white if there's no black, isn't it?
Well, whites are going to call themselves that anyway. They're
To
always
be
going to refer to themselves as white. I mean, Arabs will do that, so you know white folks are going to do it. The original Aryans that were not even Europeans, they called themselves white a long time ago before they even met real European Caucasians. So there will always be some people that will call themselves that. I'm simply saying that there is nothing wrong with us being in opposition to white. I think that that's one of the things that is necessary for humanity, not so much being in opposition to white DNA, but being in opposition to that this mindset that they've used over the globe. Yeah, we need that because without an opposition to it, skin bleach will always remain one of the best selling products. And that means that it'll be one of the most profitable things to produce. We will participate in that. It won't even be Europeans that are buying skin bleach, just as one example. So now they need to be opposed as a society, even if we take every individual as they come. They need to be opposed as a society. They are the scourge of humanity when they're coming out of Western Europe as an organized structure, because they're not even all the same. If you think about it, their cultures are different from each other's, and yet the one thing they've ever been unified on, I'm talking about the Western Europeans, not the Eastern ones. The one thing they've ever been unified on is taking everything from everybody else. There's nobody else that's ever been that unified to do this to everybody else outside of themselves. But they pretty much said we're going to make the rest of the of humanity our enemy so that we can stop fighting each other. And ironically, they weren't the first people to do that. The Aryans that went into India were the first people to think like this. Even though the Aryans are pretty much one linguistic group, the point I'm making is that they were the first ones to look and say, okay, these people look different from us, and our kids resemble them more than they resemble us when we have kids together with them. So we're going to subjugate them, and they're going to do the work, and we're going to live off of their labor and not do any of the work. So,
see,
as
I
far
don't
as opposing white, that's a necessity.
I don't even think it was that organized, because like even now, in the 21st century, in Barbados, you have ex-colony of white slaves. They call them the redlegs, and they're all poor. They all live in the poorest parts of Barbados, and they're descendants of Irish and English people. And they speak very bad, i.e., they're very country sounding. They're on the margins of society, and all the black talking points that people have in terms of oh, stop judging us by our appearance. You need to just get to know us. When I listen to the documentary, because there's a documentary on YouTube called The Red Legs, and you listen to the same talking, it's like if you close your eyes, it's like listening to black people. So for me, that tells me it wasn't even that organized, and it was never about color. It's about resource. Color has been a convenient has been a convenient distraction for people of low IQ, but the people who are not of low IQ, they are not distracted by color at all. That all they're chasing is the commerce and the resources and the power. Everyone else is looking at color. And this is the distraction that most people have, because the thing is, you find pockets, you find pockets of evidence, and you just think, oh, what the hell's going on here? Why are there, what in the 21st century, why are there ex-white slaves still in Barbados? that's telling you that the history books aren't exactly written to benefit us, even though there's a history out there that denotes something completely different. The UK was exploiting everyone. They was exploiting their own English, they're exploiting the Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish. That's why even now the Scottish do not like the English.
Yeah,
They
I never said that they wouldn't exploit each other. It's just that in order to minimize that, they still they forged a type of unity with each other to where, but it had to be based on what they were going to do to those that didn't even look like them, and I'm aware that, yeah, you got disadvantaged white folks. You'll never catch me saying that no white folks ever going to suffer. It's just that they're not going to have to suffer any extra necessarily because they're white. As you said, really it comes down to class. But if they've created a world where by default white means that you got money and black means you don't, I'm simply saying, why don't we create or at least strive to create a world where by default, we have it, they don't, and they have to do the work to extract the resources for us to live high off the hog, just to even things out for a little while. Or we could evenly split the labor and the wealth, but we know that they're not going to do that, at least until we're in a position of power for about 2 generations to get this out of their mind that they ever could do this again. Because I mean, it would take that. It would take an iron fist on their necks to put a stop to what's going on now at this point. And I'm not in favor of us becoming the oppressor that replaces them. It's not that. I just think that right now, the way we are, if we're on top, everybody else is safe. They're not going to necessarily be oppressed. But we're, every year we hold more and more of a grudge against everybody else that ever sided with white folks. And I can't say that that's not a grudge that we don't deserve to hold.
But that's because black people, instead of this blackness, instead of learning about blackness and being black, learn about business and business principles and commerce, because that is what's happening. It's not racism, it's not colorism, it's commerce. And because we are not because black people are not teaching their children about business and business principles, they cannot see it, so they internalize it and say, oh, this is colorism, oh, this is racism. And it's like the example that I gave to you the other day. When I looked at the Office of National Statistics regarding black people and convictions over here in the UK, it said that white people get less time than black people. I was like, why are white people getting less time? Is it because they're white? But
Because they plead guilty.
yes, when I delve down into the data, out of 100 cases, 75% of white people plead guilty in cases where they are convicted. 75% of black people plead not guilty in 100% of cases. So, of course, there's going to be a disparity, because we know that when you plead guilty and you save the crown time and resources and money, you get a discount. You get a discount on your time. But if you're going to plead not guilty and you're still found guilty, you get a longer sentence. That's not racism. That's business. And this is what I'm saying. And this is why this whole notion of blackness, all of it is just, all of it is an excuse and a way to try and resolve a business issue with a social issue. And the two aren't related. Black people, by coining these phrases, oh, racism, colorism, oh, this, if society stops being racist and stops being colorist, then things will be fair. What they're saying is, we want to participate in commerce, and we want to be able to access the same resources that we want to be able to access and profit the same way other groups are. But the only way you're able to do that is learning business principles. Colorism, racism, all these isms that people love throwing out there are just excuses, or trying to use social problems to resolve business problems. The black community has the biggest business issue going, and black people need to look to business, not isms, to resolve problems in the black community, especially if it comes to resources. Like even me with this pandemic, because I've had a couple incorporated businesses, I've qualified for loans. I've qualified for loans that I wouldn't have normally qualified for, all because I had businesses registered and open. How many other black people just have businesses on the standby, waiting for something, have something incorporated, waiting? No one, even my daughter has a business and she qualified because she was doing a business course. And I said, well, if you're doing a business course, you might as well incorporate a company, because over here it's only like £12 to incorporate a company. And I have my own PO box address. And I said, well, you can use my PO box address and start doing something. And she's even qualified for loans. How many other black people have done that? Just have an LLC waiting there to do business. You have an idea and you're ready to just go for it.
Well,
None. But then you want to say racism, colorism. No, you're not prepped for business. You're inept for business. You're not ready to participate in commerce. And just say that. And instead of moaning about it, learn. There's a guy that I follow, Dan Pena. Who else do I follow? I follow a guy called Dan Pena, and I follow a couple other YouTube gurus because they're quite interesting. I listened to Dan Pena's old videos regarding how he got into sales and how he's a salesman and the methods he uses to engage in commerce. Now, some of that you can't do now, but he has some really good gems: how to approach banks, how to speak to banks, how to interview a bank. Has anyone told black people you can actually go and interview a bank? You say, right, I'm new in town. I'm looking for new business in the area. And he would say that he would go, like, he would purposely, where he'd incorporate into a state, he would purposely find out all the new banks that were opening. And he said he'd be out there 9 o'clock in the morning waiting for that bank to open their doors, because he knew that that bank, as soon as he was the first customer, they've got a loan amount to give out that day or that week or that month. They were starting. He was going to be the first in there trying to get as much money as he could. How many black people do that? How many black people do that? Like, how many times do black people talk about colorism, racism? If they talked business as much as they talked about colorism, racism, sexism, gynocentrism, all these isms, they'd be paid.
well, before I go,
Sorry,
I would
I know
actually
the
like to
time
know
is
more
getting
about,
on.
and I would like to know more about what you know about business. I don't really know a lot about it myself. I know very little. Ironically, I'm learning from one of my blood relatives back in the States, slowly. But I will say this: that will probably be a discussion for another day, its own live stream. However, keep this in mind too, though. It's not that we don't need to know about business. The issue was that racism and colorism still do factor in to the barriers that our businesses would face, that somebody else's would face less of, or not at all, depending on who and where they come from. So
Not
we can't
necessarily.
ignore. You see, we can't ignore. Okay, if the UK is different, I'm glad it
No,
is. I'm
no.
glad,
Let me
but
give you an
we can't
example.
ignore business, nor can we ignore the racism and the colorism. And I'm going to tell you why I said it. And I'm not speaking for the UK, but I'll speak for the States. And then after that, I'll have to bounce out. I've used my phenotype to spy on white folks, and that's not a safe thing to do, especially in the South. But the time that I was most active in spying was actually when I got a job that took me into the northern United States. But I still spied on them for a while. Now, I didn't spy on my colleagues necessarily for very long. I didn't hide my race from them. I only hid my religion. But what I did do was that since I was in a place where I didn't really know anybody, and I was in a northern town, I wasn't in the Black Belt. I was in the northern town, northern towns actually, and we were paid well. I would go and I would sit in these nice, expensive restaurants. I didn't always, I wasn't living high on the hog per se, but I would go and sit in these areas. And we had a free country club membership that came with employment at this company, so I utilized that too. And I would go at times and eat by myself, and I would take this app on the phone that would amplify the voices from around you, and I would simply listen to what folks were saying. And what I found was two things. Number one, my southern colleagues would not even always hide the way they felt. The northern whites would They were simply discussing more so with each other, but I would keep my back on my side to them so they really wouldn't get a good look at my nose and lips, and they didn't realize who was listening. And I can tell you this, I'm not saying we don't need business. What I am saying is that they are going to do what it takes to sabotage and subvert black businesses when they know about it, and it starts to pick up. There are two threats that we have, two barriers. When you in the States, when you are a black person and you own a black owned business, there are two barriers you're going to have. One is going to be the way that black clientele are going to treat you if they know it's black owned, and two is going to be the boycott from white clientele. They know it's black owned, they just won't go. And black folks will show up, a lot of them with their hands out asking for discounts. So you've already got two disadvantages. And so that does exist. We do have to deal with that. And we still do need to know business, like you said. And I'm sure that there are ways for black folks to open and own businesses and succeed. But one of the biggest secrets I learned, and my mother confirmed it later, was that if you are a black person that owns a business, you got to deal with the public. You don't let them know you are the owner. And there's a movie about that with Anthony Mackie. I think Anthony Mackie and Samuel L. Jackson. I forgot the title of it. I didn't see it, but I know the plot. And it is about how they had a business and they had to hire a white person to be the front for the business. Yeah. So yes, yeah. You're right. Business, but also we got to prepare for this. We got to prepare for the backlash. And not only that, but if we start building towns and things like we did before, then all of a sudden the most important business is going to be the guns and ammo business. Not for offense either, but for defense, because they're going, I don't know what they're going to do in the UK, but in the States, they will come for you. They'll come legally if they can. And if not, they'll just come with violence. They're going to do what it takes to tear it down. And so you're at some point, you're going to have ammo and guns and tactics that they don't have. And that being said, I'm sorry, but now I got to run. But you let me know whatever day you want to talk about the business and, the date and time, and I'm all ears. I'll be willing to listen to what you know about it, the incorporations and ways to get around what it is that I've seen.
I would say for those that are really interested, first of all, I would say look up Dan Pena, his old videos that he used to do, like from the 1980s. They're really, really good. And also look up, there's two gentlemen. One is a gentleman called Curtis Warren. He was a mixed race gentleman from the UK. Who's the highest earning criminal ever in the UK. And another one is Stephen French, both from Liverpool. They're both from the same community. They even grew up together. And they have turned their criminal empire into legitimate businesses, all by using various methods and tactics, because they realised they used to, when Liverpool was going through its race problem, they used to fight in the race riots, and then they kind of figured this is about commerce. This isn't about race. And from the time they stopped doing that and engaged in commerce, they've not looked back. So I would say to your viewers, if you really want to know about business, look at Dan Pena and look up Stephen French. There's a documentary about him on YouTube, and Curtis Warren. Two mixed race gentlemen, no father, grew up by their white mums, but they were able to become top criminals in the UK and subsequent businessmen. So I'll leave you with that for now. And we'll speak behind the scenes.
Yes, ma'am. I look forward to it. And thanks for coming on. I appreciate you making this time. And thanks a million. And I look forward to the next time. And to the audience members, thank you all for tuning in and for listening and being patient. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And black heterosexual non-select male power just because they don't like it.
Okay.